SecurePod.
In this episode of SecurePod, I spoke with Christine Gadsby, Chief Security Advisor at BlackBerry, who brings nearly 2 decades of experience in product security, enterprise cybersecurity, and secure communications. Christine reflected on her journey from early software security roles at Microsoft to helping shape BlackBerry's long-standing reputation as a trusted security-first organization. During the conversation, we explored the evolution of the cybersecurity landscape over the past 20 years, from a time when vulnerabilities were treated as PR issues to today's highly complex interconnected threat environment. Christine provided a detailed breakdown of modern mobile attack surfaces, highlighting how metadata, network fragmentation, and global infrastructure disparities create a rich environment for adversaries. She explained why encryption alone is insufficient, and why data sovereignty and metadata control are becoming critical priorities for governments and enterprises alike. During the discussion, we also examined product security and supply chain transparency, including the growing importance of SBOMs and vendor accountability. And finally, we actually ran through what I would call a grounded perspective on AI and cybersecurity, positioning it as a powerful augmentation tool, rather than a replacement for human decision-making for now, and emphasizing the risks of over-reliance on autonomous systems. This was an excellent conversation. I really do hope you enjoy it. I enjoyed it a ton. And now on with the show. Welcome to SecurePod. I have the pleasure of welcoming Christine Gadsby. She is the Chief Security Advisor for BlackBerry. And in today's discussion, we are going to be talking about a number of very cool things. As we do on this podcast, the evolving threat landscape, mobile metadata impersonation, that type of thing. Product security and supply chain in terms of software supply chain transparency and dual use. Now, this is a conversation that has popped up fairly recently. And interestingly, I submitted an article to the Munich Security Conference about European sovereignty, which did lightly touch on the question of dual use. But that is something I'm very, very keen to hear more about. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for joining. How did you end up becoming Chief Security Advisor for BlackBerry?
That is such an interesting question. I have a very long and interesting career path getting here. I started actually with an IT degree and then went to work at Microsoft in the software side of security back when, that really wasn't a big deal. Years and years ago, believe it or not, when a security vulnerability would happen in software, it was a PR issue. It wasn't viewed as something that was really even plausible. And this was back 2005. So really the industry isn't that old. Think about that 20 years ago. We wouldn't be here talking even in this realm of conversation. Fast forward into coming to BlackBerry 17 years ago in the handset. And that was really the defining moment between a few really earned security brands, which, was our Microsoft, ourselves, and Adobe really put together what is product security. The future of that was really looking in the crystal ball and thinking, gosh, someone's going to have to own this. This is a supply chain we're creating. And if our brand is built so much on trust, then someone's going to have to own delivering that trust. And so the product security initiative at BlackBerry was born. And since then, I have been really fortunate enough to stay focused on security and the brand and being able to deliver how we transitioned out of the handset and took that security focus and brought that into software and have just continued to be able to pivot as the company has pivoted to making sure that we can deliver that trusted brand. So, fast forward, I've done many roles at BlackBerry, but here I am as a chief security advisor. And what a fascinating time to be a security advisor. It couldn't get any more volatile than it is today for sure.
That's really interesting. I did not know the background of BlackBerry back 20 years ago or more or less. You were saying that you were setting up or working with Adobe, Microsoft, and maybe other vendors, but those are some of the major ones, on a security initiative. Was BlackBerry pitching itself to the market as a trusted device prior to that, or was the pitch less on security? It was more on a communications device?
A great question. No, it's always been security, but if you think about 20 years ago, we didn't have WebKit or open source on the phone. The attack surface was completely different than it is now. And it was more these three vendors got together and sort of looked at the future and said, okay, there's going to be a time where this attack surface is going to have much bigger exposure than it does now. we're going to go from questionable vulnerabilities in software where the PR department's called to actual exploits in a device. And what does
Yep.
that look like? And so there's this old school small group of people that got together and thought, well, gosh, this needs a plan. One of the things that's really unique about BlackBerry is we understand the value of earning the trusted brand reputation. It is painstakingly earned and not bought. And this has always been the foundation of this company. And so back then, even, we looked forward and said, okay, if we're going to continue to have that trusted brand and be in these government agencies and be able to speak to the Five Eyes about device security, we have to look at the future and make sure that they're protected. And so the product security initiative, quote unquote, was kind of born out of that discussion. Microsoft and Adobe really was sort of the OG of, my gosh, we do have to think about this, and some closed door, conversations on the how, and lots of things sprang up out of that. And Cisco was in there too, just really thinking through how we did that. So it's always been the foundation, and BlackBerry's always been forefront thinker on tomorrow and how the brand is going to behave and the things that we need for how we're going to be able to guarantee that we can do what we do. A lot of it is crystal ball exercise. We have to sort of be in front of it.
Previous guest was Rachel Noble, the Director General for the Australian Signals Directorate. We didn't touch on this specific area, but certainly that's something that we've had discussions about when the microphone's been switched off. When I think about initiatives that are running at this point in time, obviously we're focusing on BlackBerry for the time being during this podcast, but there's something that I was speaking with a couple of Microsoft folks, which is the Secure Futures initiative. What I notice about, and you see this kind of in a trend, fortunately or unfortunately, but certainly expectedly, a company like Microsoft sometimes responds to issues and then they push the accelerator on some of the security initiatives like Secure Futures Initiative, the SFI, and then beholden to shareholders, beholden to the market. You'd sometimes see that ebb and flow. Now, I wonder whether, just as a general question prior to jumping into our first topic, whether you see, not in BlackBerry, because it does really sound like it embodies a continued focus on this trust building exercise, but whether you see more generally in the vendor marketplace, for example, even non-security specific vendors like Microsoft actually going, all right, we do have to do this and we do have to do this continually, not just from a quarterly exercise and not just after there's been a headline and then 1 year later we can sort of let it go by the wayside.
Yeah. So all of our security as a vendor, we all come to the table with the same thing. We all want to do the right thing at the right time. And vendors that aren't security vendors want to do the right thing for security at the right time. I think everybody can agree it's an arms race, right? We're all out to defend. We're all out to protect. The challenge always comes, we put all these really grandiose ideas against the wall, and then reality hits, right? It costs money, it costs time, and some of them defy gravity. So it's really easy to say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z based on these things. And then when it comes into, oh, I actually have to do this work and it has to be done Tuesday at 4:00, it falls apart. Because security can oftentimes defy gravity. We can say we want this level of security, but getting that level of security can be impossible. It really can. And I think what you see when you aren't a security vendor, this isn't everybody, but there is a chance that you will either lack expertise, resources, time, or money. It's one of those. And so I think if it's not your core principle that you do every day, speaking from a security vendor, I can tell you that there is no meeting in this company that happens without the word security coming in versus, an enterprise business where it might just be 10% and they're fighting for budget at the board level. We don't fight for budget at the board level because it is what we do. It's sort of a tug of war between an enterprise company and a security vendor. The challenge is old as time for us, really.
Yeah, and I think you're very lucky to be working in that company based on that, because when there's the tug of war for the budget, I guess you do have the upper hand when you have a company which is basically building their business and brand on trust and security. That's a lovely segue to move into what's happening. There's a lot happening just in general in technology. How are secure communications changing?
Yeah, and this is such a fascinating topic. And speaking of the Australian Signals Director, I was recently in Sydney and spoke at South by Southwest when I believe it was close to or the same time the latest report came out. And it was fascinating, some of the things that actually Australia is looking at. And taking a step back from that and looking at the overarching view of where security and communications are right now. I think if we go back to the start of sort of what we talked about at the beginning of this, which is when you look at software security in general, Imagine that was 20 years ago, and here we are today really looking at an attack surface that has become a gold mine. If you look at things like Salt Typhoon and their ability really to use communications as a vessel to harvest metadata and to really look at how we drive AI attack surface in there, it is fascinating. And you think about the overall attack surface from mobile communication in the first place, right? You've got one device. You've got 240 or 50 different software suppliers or vendors and their security posture in that device. You're taking a whole bunch of gold mine data and you're sending that off into the ether to another device, which also has another 250 or so vendors in that. And in the middle, you have an incredible attack surface where that message or that call takes 12 to 15 hops between different technologies. And one of those, SS7 technology, sitting in that is from the 70s. So we know that that in itself, just the start to the end of that transaction, is incredibly rich with all of these different attack surface points. And we know that there are areas of the globe that can't defend themselves as much as we can here, luckily in the States. But the global south is still on 3 and 4G technology. So you add in kind of all of that attack surface. And then you have areas of the globe that there are groups right now playing really at what evolves to target practice in 3 and 4G areas of the world, where they're literally just running AI to test exploits, figuring out where they break, fixing them, rerunning them, and then moving them up the chain to a higher security market, and then seeing where that breaks, and so on and so on. So really, this has become a robotic way. And then, you have Goldmine, which is really the metadata piece. There's lots of things that people don't think about when they use like free messaging apps and the data that they're putting in there that is free and available. It's either harvested by a third party and being sold, or it's crossing those wires of insecurity. But those pieces of data as a gold mine and combined with sort of the mobile attack surface is the new way we're looking at this from a secure communications point, kind of the gold mine of what's going on right now.
It's really interesting to hear you mention that emerging markets, because of the still maturing technological infrastructure, are in essence sandboxes, playgrounds for threat actors to test out their wares prior to actually moving up the chain. And this, while slightly off topic, I'm not sure whether you're aware of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise or any of the other type of associated initiatives like the Internet Freedom Initiatives, to see budgets cut from them across the board, certainly the US, but also, in following suit, UK, other countries as well, I think is a crying shame, because obviously they do assist in advising countries which are still building their policies, still building their infrastructure as well, hardware, software, on best practices, so that in an effort for them to not become a testing ground, but that I guess is just a trend, and it's something that we see with different administrations doing what they do. The metadata point is obviously huge. Can you explain to me from a technical standpoint what BlackBerry does in terms of mitigating any risks from over insertion to metadata pools? Or if you can sort of summarize the approach that BlackBerry has to mitigate that kind of developing a greater footprint than you would like in terms of metadata.
I think one thing that will help answer that question too, and speaking of what we do, is to talk a little bit about the word encryption. One of the things that I see a lot, end up speaking a lot on, is this claim, we can use these free messaging apps and, our message is encrypted, even end-to-end encryption, which, one of the things that we really struggle with as security vendors is, what does that actually mean? It doesn't really have meaning unless you ask a lot more questions. So I'll start there and say that it is possible to use a free messaging application that claims it's end-to-end encrypted. And the details of the message may be encrypted. With what kind of encryption, still don't know the answer to that. But the metadata piece and the who is sending it, where are they located, what technology are they using, and do they go to this Starbucks to send this message and call this person every day at 3:00, the pattern prediction, that kind of thing, even thumbnails of messages that you send, even if they are encrypted. What is actually being transmitted in that hostile attack surface that we are now referring to. And this is something that I think every security person that I know at least agrees on, is that we have to treat the mobile network as it's hostile, and the devices even, that they're hostile, because they are. One of the things that BlackBerry has always done and really focused on is the sovereignty of your data should be your data. And in one of our products, we have a product called SecuSuite. And it focuses on first the encryption for the voice, and the message itself is NIAP certified encryption. So, it's not just encryption, it's actually certified. That's NSA level encryption. And what we focus on is giving our consumers a sovereign control of their metadata. So when you install SecuSuite on your devices, if you are company A, you own the administrative control of all the metadata. So you actually have to invite people to use the app. You can't go to the app store, find the app itself. You have to actually invite your people. You could administratively control that, and then you own their metadata. So either we can help you do that or you do that on-prem yourself. And this is one thing that I will say on a global landscape is becoming a much more invited topic of discussion is cloud kind of was the thing, and everybody was trying to move their stuff to the cloud. But we're seeing a lot of governments pull back and say, wait a minute, that might not have been, the thing we wanted. And now we want to talk about data sovereignty and how we make sure that we maintain and control our metadata because we do see that attack surface. So our product allows for both of those things, both the administrative control of that metadata and making sure that you own it and only you see it, and then also NIAP level encryption on the messages that are coming out and then back to the device. So it's kind of a twofold and two-pronged approach for the highly regulated secrets that need to be, everybody needs to use messaging apps, right? None of us can say that we don't. It's just there is a difference between I'm sending my grocery order to my daughter, telling her on one of the free apps versus, nation state level secrets that need to go between 2 points.
Which still shouldn't go through Signal, which by all accounts for a free app is still pretty darn good. But there's a big but there.
Yes, there is a big but there. And if it's again, nation state secrets or your financial data, those are important things.
Yeah. The question about sovereignty as well is something that's certainly striking a chord over here on this side of the pond. In Munich Security Conference, I recently submitted an essay, which was out of 5 winners, I was number 5. I was pretty chuffed though. The argument was along the lines of digital sovereignty, and rather than look at it from a completely autonomous standpoint where you basically cut ties with all the major players because it's impossible. It's a much more pragmatic view where you say, okay, well, can we have some amount of strategic reversibility? Are there mechanisms in place, both technical and also legislative, that we can actually receive or retain ownership over the keys or something else like that? And that I think is quite a pragmatic approach. It does sound like how BlackBerry does it is, no, if you want to roll this out on-prem in your jurisdiction, you can, and then you own everything. We're sort of set aside from that. So it does bring me to the next question that I wanted to discuss, which was product security and I guess the question of supply chain and transparency over the supply chain from fabric to any applications that have been built at different layers. How do these intersect with broader enterprise security strategies?
It's critical. This is an interesting topic of conversation, and one that I've actually had with a few of our customers lately is vendor accountability. Now is the time to be looking to your vendors and be asking for things like, are you shipping me an SBOM with that release? And does that contain a VEX? Because it does matter. The SBOM is really looking at what's inside, and the VEX is really answering, does any of that matter? And I read an interesting article a couple of days ago that software bill of materials is what SBOM stands for, but really what we're looking at now is more of a system bill of materials, which I thought was an interesting analogy. It's now become, I would say in the last 2 years, and it's funny, this industry is just so ever evolving, ever changing, and it's so fast to be able to respond to attack surface changes. But SBOM itself is really, it's not very old. What are we, 2019, 20 that we started talking about creating an SBOM? So to answer your question, every enterprise needs to be worried about their supply chain. And the amount of enterprise level companies that I speak with that really do not understand the depth of what that means is incredibly fascinating. So if you think about a company that consumes software and even a company that produces software, imagine the level of supply chain risk that they have.
Almost infinite.
It is infinite because you're purchasing companies' software and you're putting that into your internal network, and then you are selling software. You've got liability on both sides of that. And, you can ask, we can go back to SolarWinds. We can go back to lots of game-changing, more recent things that have really changed how we thought about it. But it really thinking about, and when I speak about this publicly, I like to use an analogy like a chocolate cake. You're baking an 18-layer chocolate cake. Imagine how many ingredients and where all those came from. You've got flour, you've got an oven that cooks it, you've got baking powder, you've got cocoa powder. All of those represent how many more things that went into it. Turn your ingredients list on a label of granola bars and you'll see you've got thousands of things. So if you do not hold them accountable and you do not have a vendor accountability program and you're not asking for SBOMs or VEX for that matter, and there's some level of accountability for a vendor that does provide it. If they say they can't, then you ask, when can I get it? If they provide it for you, then they've done their level of homework and they know what they're releasing, is kind of how I like to think about it. So while the industry sort of catches up on how to process those documents, because it is a lot. I mean, think about the size of my company and how many I have to produce them and collect them. That's a
Yep.
lot of data. The industry is catching up fast to that. In practice, the supply chain transparency piece, especially with AI, is going to be absolutely critical because that's now going to evolve. Another thing I read a couple of days ago was we're seeing AI attacks in supply chains for some of the cloud hosted service providers for AI models where they're actually getting in and changing prompt language and
Yep.
things, and you have no visibility over that.
Yep.
So, you have to have these different levels of conversation every single time you go. So product security, if it couldn't have gotten any harder, it just got harder. It
Yeah,
really did.
it certainly did. And the mention of SBOMs and a process to go through one of these, regulatory hurdles, if you will. I can't help but think that obviously that is an incredibly important standard to implement because you do want to filter out companies that are not abiding by quote unquote good security practices or best practices. How do you test that? Because if I answer in my SBOM all the correct answers, and then maybe I am keeping up with most of them, how can I assure you that those 18 layers of cake where I have an open source project which did have poisoning and there's an npm package that one of my devs installed, how can I assure you of that during that process? Because sometimes the extensiveness of some of the programs which are designed to filter out issues like that just cannot cater to that type of issue.
Yeah, fair question. And I think again, this we have to look at every company's goals and where they're at in their life. The design of SBOM and VEX really is supplier accountability and it's at build time. So if we start there and we say the difference between a company like BlackBerry and a government enterprise and a roof shingle maker are not going to be the same. If I am intaking SBOM and VEX from those different, with those different hats I'm wearing as a security professional, the roof shingle maker is worried about, if it's a scale of 1 to 10, maybe they're on a 2. G17 is a 10. I am in my company a 10. Then you have to kind of scale that back to what does your SDL maturity look like internally? And then what is your threshold? So an SBOM itself is just that list of ingredients. It really doesn't tell you anything. I could ship you an SBOM of something and it could land on my plate. And then it's up to you in your marker of where you fit on that security maturity scale to then go out and do your own testing against that. Now, a VEX is different, right? A
Yep.
VEX is what accompanies that, and that's really a company putting their stake in the ground to what you should care about because the infinite problem with product security and the challenge with product security is an SBOM or a vulnerability report or whatever does not determine exploitability. It never
Exactly.
has. And that
Yep.
is the difference between doing an IT scan of a system and things running to looking at a SBOM and being able to determine anything. You're not looking at exploitability because anything could be in how that software is running. Those fixes could have been cherry picked. Maybe the version of Java isn't called anywhere. Maybe the functionality isn't there. So it is up to you, purchaser, to look in your environment and see how you're running that software to determine your own risk landscape. And that is why product security is so incredibly difficult, is because you and I could both purchase Windows. We could both purchase a security app to run firewall app, but how it's running in your environment, how it's running in mine, completely different. You have to determine that for yourself. And then again, if you're on the 10 scale, then you've got to be really risk averse. If you're on the 2 scale, maybe, you see if the latest library versions are updated or something.
I love that. We'll go to the third and final topic, which is AI as dual use. So defense and exploitation. Obviously, this is a market mover. Companies are getting slammed in the stock market because investors are jittery about what AI might do and what Claude Code security announcements might do to application security, whether it's warranted or not. My thoughts are it's kind of not for many instances. They're not going to replace a CrowdStrike anytime soon or a CoreView. However, there's a lot of change. So how are you looking at this, particularly from, BlackBerry's focus areas?
So AI, like the rest of the world, is valuable here in that AI meaningfully helps signal to noise ratio detection,
Hmm.
speed, analyst argumentation.
Mhm.
But where it fails, and it will fail, is autonomous decision making. It still needs human oversight. And you need that for governance, for any kind of threat modeling you're putting together for AI,
Yep.
any kind of certification or regulation you're trying to meet, you need to be very, 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 very careful. I have seen reports of some hallucinations that it has made that has cost companies a lot of money. Again, where it's detection, signal to noise, prioritization, I think those are great. And I have seen it help train junior analysts on SOC teams. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But it is not an automated decision maker. It should not be left without oversight. And it can introduce new risks. So you have to be really, 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 really careful. I still think it's an arms race. I think AI does great things, but I also think it causes many things. So in dual use, it is, I believe, really be careful, very careful.
So SecureFly, which is my day job, we created a threat modeling automation tool which does leverage Anthropic to a certain degree. It leveraged it more, but we decided to actually blend that with this nice mix of, okay, create a visual diagram leveraging that Anthropic API. However, the rest is rules-based because that we can trust. That is something that we understand extremely well internally, but therefore we can categorize correctly. Otherwise, non-deterministic, who knows? Could be a high, could be a low.
Perfect. And that is a really great example of where you've taken something that AI is really good at and valuable at, and then you've put layers of control over the top,
Yeah.
which is exactly what I recommend to all the people that I talk to about using AI in security.
I mean, it's short but sweet, but that basically brings us to the end of the talking points that I wanted to discuss. Christine, do you have anything that you wanted to add in terms of upcoming things, upcoming events, presentations that you're giving, anything on BlackBerry's side that you wanted to announce or?
Yeah, absolutely. I am actually getting ready to head to Barcelona for Mobile World Congress next week.
Muy bien.
Yes, very excited about that and really looking forward to a panel that we're doing there on curing the global south. We're going to talk a lot about AI and that network that we talked about in the beginning, the mobile network that we talked about in the beginning of this call, and really how does the global south look at bringing in security and technology improvements with the small, which you also pointed out, small amounts of finance resources that they have and some best practices and recommendations for a few really solid panelists. So I'm really looking forward to that next week.
I wish you safe travels. I wish I could be there, although I just returned from Sydney. So I need to stay here and look after the dog. Thank you so much for your time, Christine. It's been an absolute pleasure. And until next time when we meet somewhere in the world.
SecurePod. 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 SecurePod.